Okay, so whilst there's not one perfect board for everyone, every now and then there's the lucky few of us that find that magic board, the board that does everything that we want and that we definitely never want to let go of. And today I'm here to help you walk through the formula where you can find this magic board for yourself, considering where you're currently at in your surfing, the things that you're trying to learn, and which waves you're surfing back home. So let's get into that now. And for those of you who are new here, my name's Ben Considine and I'm a professional longboarder, a surf coach and a physical therapist, or a physio depending on where you're from. And I created a platform called longboardsessions.com to help surfers experience the best in their surfing. And today I'm here to help you unlock your surfing potential no matter where you're at. And if you do find this valuable today, then please feel free to join myself as well as the other members at longboardsessions.com, where we personally help to dive deep into your surfing and give you a track and feedback loop for really meaningful progression in your surfing. So I have two beautiful new boards here today, the OG67 and the Virtuoso by South Coast Surfboards. And these boards actually have some really unique and different design elements that we're going to use as our template today for allowing you to understand what you need in the boards that you're riding for where you're at in your surfing and the kind of things that you're looking to learn and progress on with. This is going to help make the difference for you to being able to decide when your mate sends you a board online or when you walk into a surf shop and think, yep, this is the right board for me, this is the kind of specs that I'm looking at finding, or deciding that it's not quite right for you and that you should probably keep an eye out for something else. Now, to really get a good understanding of this, we're going to take both these boards down to the beach and we're going to surf them, trial and test them. This one I've surfed a couple of times, the OG67, the Virtuoso I've never been on. But what we're going to be ranking these against is our level of surfing, so beginner, intermediate and advanced, and I'll break that down, and understanding the different design elements of these different boards, and how do we break these down for understanding what design elements we want for turning, nose riding, and that feeling of gliding on the wave in these different levels of surfing that we're at. Now I'm going to leave you to wonder how I actually put these boards down. All right, so let's head to the beach and we're gonna try and give you the formula to actually understand what designs you want in your board for the level of surfing you're at and what you're looking to work on. Tail shape, rocker, wide point, length. Let's demystify all of this now. See you at the beach. This was an epic session. It was a beautiful sunny day and I couldn't wait to get on the boards. This is my first time surfing the Virtuoso and one of the first sessions I've had on the OG67, which I've been loving. And this is honestly the best conditions we've had in a couple of weeks. The first thing that strikes me about the OG67 is the pace on the wave. It feels like from the get-go you're really connected to the wave and it's really easy to find your rhythm and find your line on the wave. You can feel the knifey rails on this one being really, really good for slicing through the water, especially in the turns, and how it maintains trim speed. And the effect of this when you bring it on rail is really obvious. The other really good thing about this board is its ability to hold in the pocket, create lift, and be really, really connected within the pocket on the nose rides. On some boards I ride, it feels like you need to be a little bit further away from the pocket or it struggles to get in the hook of the wave. But with these boards, having the narrower nose and the wide point back, as well as the tight tucked in rails, the nose connects into the pocket perfectly. Now it was time to take the jackrabbit out, put it in the Virtuoso and get out there. The Virtuoso honestly feels completely different, but in a really good way. Firstly, the rails feel a lot bigger and it feels like you're sitting out of the water more, which makes sense because the OG67 has extremely knifey rails. The other noticeable thing on this one was the rail disengagement on our turns. When I was turning, I had to be a little bit more cautious not to push too hard, especially coming from just having surfed the OG67, because with that little bit more rocker and the wide point in the middle, as soon as you stepped onto the tail, the nose lifted out of the water a little bit more easily, and it was a little bit easier for me to overcook the turns. What was interesting with this though, is that instead of feeling like I was going to bog or catch a rail, it felt like I was going to turn too hard, which speaks to the strengths of each board. The OG67 being a flatter design which you can push a little bit harder with, and the Virtuoso being a little bit safer with the turns.
Now, the thing that was really interesting with this one was walking up the board. As I moved up the board, it felt like it was almost getting more balanced as I moved my way towards the nose. This being because of the really wide surface area that the board maintains from the midpoint through to the nose. It honestly feels like there's a big, wide platform that feels super stable and really easy to adjust your balance and line on. On the nose, this felt the same. I could have a wider stance on my hang tens, which actually allowed me to lean into the rails a little bit easier. The board wasn't as flat and didn't lock in and lift as much as the OG67. This actually meant I could steer a little bit easier on these nose rides and hold them for a little bit longer potentially, but with less stability and that lock-in effect as the other board. That was an epic session, but let's actually go home and translate this into how you can find your magic board. Alright, first of all, what an awesome session. That was really fun. We got fun waves for the day. I'm a new man now. I've got new boards, new haircut since I last filmed. So yeah, ready to get into it. So I want to give you guys the tools that can help you guys to distinguish what board is right for you. There's going to be 5 key things that we look at. So it's going to be things like the tail shape, the rocker, the wide point, the rail profile, as well as the nose width. They're the big things that I like to focus on. And we're going to focus on this for beginner, intermediate, and advanced surfers, and how this affects our nose riding, our turns, and our glide or overall feel on the waves. And we're going to do all of that in the context of this table here. So I'll fill this out in a second and give you guys a great idea of what you need. Okay, so for our turns and the beginner surfers, the key things that I really like to focus on are 3 specific things. The first one is going to be the wide point in the middle. Now, the reason that I like the wide point in the middle for our turns is because, as we just said, it actually helps to disengage rail. A lot of the time, if we have the wide point back, it makes it a little bit stickier and a little bit harder to lift more of our rail out of the water. The more rail that is stuck into the water, the more ability we have to catch a rail and bog and fall. And so that's why for beginners, I specifically like the wide point in the middle or even a little bit further forwards. The next thing I like is a medium rocker. Now, the reason I like a medium rocker, and the rocker being that kind of banana shape that you get or how flat it is from tail to the nose, is for the same reason for the turns. If you have a bit of rocker, then what we can actually do is disengage rail more easily, making it more turn friendly and less likely to catch a rail. And the last point here that I like for the turns is to make sure that we've got a square tail. Now, the reason I like the square tail is because it provides a nice balance. It's not as maneuverable and as unsteady as a pintail, which we can speak about soon. And having a wider tail at this stage in our surfing isn't a bad thing for maneuverability. It just creates that steadiness and that stability that we need. So I like to rely on a wide square tail here. Now, for beginners, when we come to nose riding, I don't even like to consider it. Obviously, at this stage in our surfing, we want to be considering things like our balance and our position on the board and how the board is actually riding along the wave and giving us stability. So for that, I'm going to say it's not applicable. And then lastly here, coming to the glide purposes, what I really like to make sure that we're having, and this is more from a stability perspective whilst we're riding the wave, is going to be a thick rail, and then also for this point, making sure that the wide point is in the middle. This is going to make sure that we're gaining most of our speed in the middle of the board, which is a really important concept for our beginner surfers, not holding back too far in the tail. And it also ensures that with that rail thickness, so with a thick rail, we're going to be a little bit further out of the water. And this is just going to help for our balance and stability and reducing friction and drag in the water. Okay, so that brings us to our intermediate surfers. Now, what does intermediate surfing look like? This actually takes us for a large spectrum up to our advanced surfing, where we're getting either starting to learn or getting more proficient and good at our turning, as well as beginning and getting quite proficient with our nose riding. And all of this speed management and understanding how to utilize the wave effectively does fit into this realm as well. So this is a really important one. Now, for this, we've actually got the same 3 principles that I like for a beginner surfer that an intermediate surfer needs to maintain. And this actually tells us something really important, that for a beginner board, we can actually have very similar dimensions to take us through that intermediate stage. Of course, if we're riding a G board or some kind of soft top, we will need to progress that to a fiberglass board, so that's the main thing. But in terms of the specific dimensions and outlines that we want on our board, it's very similar. So all of these three are actually going to stay the exact same for our intermediate surfers with regards to turns. For our nose rides, this is where this actually comes into play and we can start to talk about this. The first thing I want to mention is that our wide point needs to come into the middle or even forwards of that middle point. Now, this is similar to what I just spoke about with the Virtuoso here. With that wide point, not at the back point, but at the middle and even a little bit further forwards for some boards, it actually helps to increase our balance and decrease the wobbliness as we're moving up towards the nose. We feel like we've got this big platform that we can play around with and keep our steadiness. With the wide point backboards, it does get slimmer and slimmer naturally as we move towards the nose, and therefore it can be a lot trickier to maintain our balance as we're walking to the nose, as well as nose riding. The next thing, again, is to make sure we have a medium rocker. Now, the reason for this is to actually make sure that we've got a bit of a safety net as we're learning to cross step to the nose and as we're learning to nose ride. If we've got a very flat board, then what ends up happening is it has one specific position on the wave that it's really conducive to nose riding, and that's really close to the pocket where it can actually create some lift. But with a board that has a little bit of rocker to it, we have the advantage of having a little bit of a safety net. So a curve that steers away from the water at the front end and as well as at the back end, that helps to, again, act as a bit of a buffer. That means that it's not as easy to nosedive. So this is a really, really good thing to add in as well. Now, the next things that come into this is the tail and nose shape. And specifically for this, what I like to recommend is a wide square tail, as well as a wide surface area up the nose. Now, the reason for this is because, again, if we've got a wider tail, then it's going to, I feel like, act as a little bit more of an anchor at the back and provide that extra stability when we are walking up to the nose. And if we have a wider nose, again, it really helps to reinforce that increased surface area that we can step to and actually balance on when we're walking up to and standing on the nose. So this is a big one. It's very, very difficult to start out nose riding on a narrow nose. Okay, and then that brings us to the glide element, or how can we feel like we've got as much speed and connection with the wave with our boards in the intermediate stage of our surfing. And this is where things change a little bit from the beginner stage. What we actually want for something like this is we want to maintain our wide point in the middle, okay? And we know this because this is just such an added benefit for our turning and nose riding at this stage. The thing that changes a little bit here is that we actually want to start to drop the thickness in that rail and get a bit more of a low profile rail. The reason that we want this, as we get a knifier or a narrower rail, is actually helps us to engage with the wave. So rather than being so much of a seesaw effect from rail to rail, we're slicing through the water a little bit better with our rail. I find that with our intermediate surfing, if we keep a really thick rail, that this can impede us a little bit. So we definitely want to start to tuck our rail in and get a low profile rail. But that here takes us through to the advanced. Now, when we go to the advanced levels of surfing, this is where typically the biggest lever that we pull is pulling people into the pocket and pushing and driving a little bit more with their turns, okay? So for that reason, I'll pop this up here. For that reason, we are going to focus on or advanced surfers that are wanting to improve their turns beyond the intermediate stage. What I like to focus on first is going to be that low rail that we spoke about before. Now, again, the reason is the same as with a lobber, more tucked rail. Then what's going to happen is we're going to be slicing through the water a little bit more easily, and I feel like we're connecting with the turn in the water a little bit better rather than having that wobble from side to side, which can happen with a thicker rail. Certainly noticing that a little bit more on this compared to this one, which has very knifey rails. The next thing that changes here for our turns is I like to bring the wide point back. Now, with our wide point back, what we're actually going to be doing is we are going to be at a slightly increased risk of bogging a rail, as we spoke about before, but we're going to be able to engage more rail for some bigger, more drawn out carving turns. I think this is a really, really good design and something that's certainly really conducive for our point break type waves. We can, of course, be an advanced level surfer without a wide point backboard. The wide point backboards are a little bit harder to surf, but I would argue produce a really lovely drawn out turn. So this is just a good way to make sure that we're advancing our turns. Now, with the low rocker, this of course means that the board is going to be flatter. And the reason that we want to start to do that is because we're actually going, again, to be connecting more rail to the water as we're turning. We're also going to have enhanced speed going down the line and on the wave. So this can also be a factor that helps us to create speed and create more drive through our turn. So this is something that, again, creates a bit more risk, but definitely has that reward. Now, for the tail, I like to say here, depending on what we're after for a turn, we can go for a narrower square tail or even a pin. Both of these are going to increase that line towards the tail in which we can engage the rail effectively, with a fatter square tail that is less than if we've got a narrower square or a straight line all the way into a pin. Of course, there's factors with a pin tail that come into play which may not be as conducive for a nose rider board, but both are really, really beneficial to our advanced turns. And the last part here is going to be for our turns, ensuring that we have a narrow nose. Now, this is going to happen anyway if we have a wide point backboard, because what will naturally happen is the widest point will be further back and then it will narrow out as it goes towards the nose. This is that classic peak style shape that you might see a lot in the Australian style logs. This is really, really good to make sure that we're actually decreasing the surface area up the top end so that we can really engage our turns with decreased weight up top. Now, if we come into the juicy stuff, the nose riding for our advanced nose rides. The big things we want to see here that advance our nose riding in this stage is pulling closer to the pocket. So we want a board that really helps us with that. Something that I'm very big on in terms of getting a more critical nose ride is having the wide point back as well as a narrow nose. The reason for this is if we want to tuck in closer to the pocket, we want to make sure that the nose actually fits into those tighter areas. In terms of locking really tight into the pocket, the narrow nose definitely helps, and having that wide point back also helps. That's the effect that we can have to create even more lift on our nose riding. And again, the two parameters we're thinking about for tight and more advanced nose rides is critical in the pocket and creating lift. So that's what we want for this one. The other little things here is of course making sure that we've got a flatter outline, so low rocker. But with that, I like a little bit of flip in the tail. That flip and kick in the tail specifically is really, really good at creating a good amount of drag at the tail when we're nose riding tight in the pocket, and again helps to accentuate that lift. Now the last thing I would add here is I really like to maintain a square tail for our nose riding purposes. In saying this though, we can definitely maintain a narrower square tail and still have a really good effect if the pod or the back part of that board is still quite wide. And then it comes to, I guess, the advanced glide. So what are we looking for there to make the board feel as good, fast, and connected to the wave? Three things here. I think that having a low rail really helps us to feel that connection, the same as what we've spoken about previously, and helps to really maintain speed, as well as having a flatter rocker or a flatter board, a lower rocker. That's really, really helpful as well, because we will maintain speed and connection with the wave. So they're two things that I definitely like from a feeling perspective. And then the last point here is the wide point. We can opt to have the wide point in the middle or the wide point back. I think this is a bit of a muchness. I do prefer the wide point back just in terms of how it feels, because I feel like we can really connect with our turns, and I think it helps from a nose riding perspective as well in these advanced stages. But again, that does come with more risk. We can still have a great, really well functioning board at an advanced level for a log with the wide point in the middle. If you did find this useful, then please feel free to subscribe. And I just want to say a massive thank you to all the new members at Longboard Sessions over the past week as well. Again, having an absolute blast, really enjoying helping everyone and seeing the progress and giving tips and really just being connected with your journeys. It's a bunch of fun. So once again, thanks to everyone who's joined up, and for anyone thinking about it, would of course love to see you in there. And if you did enjoy this one, then make sure you watch the clip that's somewhere here, which is really crucial for improving your backhand surfing. You catch you on the next one. Yep.